Obviously, we've had a major weather event in Nelson,
Sure.
Tasman, in the last few weeks. So will that refocus your thinking about what you want to achieve going into council?
Well, firstly, it makes the job much harder. So we're going to have a bill of tens of millions of dollars for fixing the council's own infrastructure. That's going to put the organisation under financial pressure and rates under pressure. The second thing is that we've got a large number of homeowners as a consequence of both the landslides and the flood damage, of which we're going to have a long and painful journey of working through each of those cases. Now, I'm pretty experienced in this space. I worked as Minister of Building and Construction and Environment in Christchurch, as well as with the Kaikoura earthquakes and the Edgecumbe floods. And there are some important lessons for how we need to do this stuff. First up, we need to recognise that the construction sector is actually really short of skills at the moment. And construction prices are moving faster than what they have in 30 years. We're going to need to be quite innovative in how we contract with the civil engineering community to get the job done quickly. In Kaikoura, we used an alliance type model, and I think we should be doing something of that sort. Secondly, if we're going to make the cost manageable and affordable for the Nelson community, then we need to go hard on making sure we maximise the amount of government assistance. Truth is, Nelson taxpayers spent a bomb on helping out Christchurch and Kaikoura when they had their downside, and it is reasonable for us to proactively go to government and say, look, Nelson's had its rainy day literally, and we need help. Third thing is around the issue of consenting. In both Christchurch and Kaikoura, they can hold up the recovery. We need to really make sure that we have got the oil well greased around that consenting process. Nothing worse for the homeowner that needs to build a retaining wall or some other new feature being held up by bureaucracy in the fix. In Christchurch and in Kaikoura, we actually use special fast track powers, and we should be open to doing that in the recovery mode. And then you've got the issue with the insurance. And look, this is going to be extra complicated for Nelson. Only last year, there were very significant law changes around the EQC. It's designed to try and be better, but when we're the first major event since that law change, we're going to have to be pretty proactive to make sure that those insurance companies are settling claims in a timely way. The worst case scenario for Nelson, in my view, will be to have families 3, 4, 5, or even like Christchurch, a decade down the track, unable to settle. This stuff is just so grinding on families and morale, and so we need to do that. And the last and the fifth thing we need to do is, what are the learnings from this event? Now, if I look at some of the major landslides that occurred in Ngāwatu Valley, there was netting placed there. It was clear that there was landslide risk. You don't have to have a PhD in landslides, and even though I do, to know that actually there's this stuff up here. And either the developer or the council, I'm not interested in beating anybody up. I am interested in learning so that we can make sure that our subdivisions are better consented in future, so that we reduce the number of families going through the heartache from both the landslide and the flooding damage.
And one of the things that we hear from the business community, but from everybody generally, but often from the business community, is that council can be a handbrake in terms of the regulation and the consenting, and appreciating that in national government there's more, you're creating the rules where they're being implemented locally. As mayor, how would you influence how the council operates in that way?
Really, first thing you need to do, Ellie, is councils and anybody manages well what they measure. So what the council should do is to require both its resource consenting and building consenting to have reports every single month on the number of consents that are overdue or late, and reward and focus on improving that performance. Now, it's not possible as mayor, there are hundreds and thousands of consents that go through the council. It's about getting those systems right and the incentives, and so that the council is very aware when consents are late. Secondly, we do need to deliberately prioritise those consents for the recovery work. That is, I don't think anybody will have any difficulty in saying, actually, these people have been through hell and back. We need to give them the extra support. We're going to put them at the top of the pile.
Do you think there's an issue with the council being a unitary authority where it's actually regulating things as well as having the vision that council has to do things, and then the regulation arm that often can be that handbrake? Do you think there's an issue with that?
No, I think quite the opposite. I think actually if you look, and when I was Minister for the Environment and Minister of Local Government, and you looked at the performance of Tasman, Marlborough and Nelson as unitary councils, actually had less complaints and less bureaucracy. The moment you split that up, the poor old landowner or property owner gets caught as the meat in the sandwich between two organisations that are fighting with each other. One of the reforms that I was involved in was the establishment of the Super City in Auckland. At the time that was formed, there was over 350 legal actions of the regional council scrapping with either the district or the city councils. Now the ratepayer loses on both sides of that, paying the lawyers. There are sometimes tricky issues that relate to those regional and local issues. They're far better under the one tent of a single council, and that's one of the reasons I am so opposed to Three Waters, because in my view you're going to fragment the management of things like stormwater, and that's actually going to make it tougher to get good outcomes and manage those risks. And we all know those risks are going to get tougher with climate change.
I had a specific question about Three Waters, so we may as well go to that. Obviously you're against it. So do you not see, or do you think that people might have a different view in light of the floods that we've had and now the repair bill that's facing us? Do you think people will have a different view on Three Waters?
No, I don't. And I think the level of concern around Three Waters is quite deep-seated. Firstly, the thing with Three Waters is it doesn't make economic sense. That is, look, Nelson is proposed to be thrown in with Tasman and Marlborough to an entity going from Wellington all the way up the east coast. Anybody who looks at that region will know that there are billions to be spent in Wellington. Effectively, councils in Wellington quite openly have neglected water infrastructure for 30 years. And I don't think it's fair that Nelson ratepayers, who have actually had to cough up quite a bit, whether it was for the Maitai Dam in the 1980s, whether it was for the water treatment plant, who have met that bill, are now going to be asked to bail out Wellington, particularly noting Wellington's actually a significantly more wealthy community than us. So it does not make economic sense. Secondly, it does not make engineering sense. I asked you to look at a valley like the Brook, right? And I want you to tell me, under Three Waters, you've got a drain, you've got bridges, you've got curb and channel and pipes. Which bit get to be managed by the water entity and which by the council? It will be a bugger's muddle. It will be a mess. And in my view, the floods actually highlight the real benefit. Now, there are some areas of the council I'm critical of. I've got to say that when I look at some of the streets and how badly they were damaged by the floods and the way the council and its contractors got stuck in fixing the water pipes, the road, the footpath and the curb and channel, all with the same contractor, was a great illustration of the benefits of having that stuff all under one roof. And then the third part of Three Waters that gives me the GBs is the comments from the Auditor General, who said that the lack of transparency and the lack of accountability in the structure bodes very poorly for the management of those Three Waters. And then the last bit that I just would love somebody to explain to me what makes sense is that under the Three Waters proposal, North Island iwi are going to have more say on the management of Nelson's $600 million plus of water infrastructure than the Nelson City Council that's democratically elected and built those assets up over 170 years. That is illogical, that is not sound, and if I'm privileged to be being mayor, then I will fight those Three Waters reforms very vigorously. That's not to say that there isn't a case for reform. If we look, for instance, at the Nelson Tasman Wastewater Authority, it's actually the gem of actually quite a positive idea. So I wouldn't want to leave people with the impression that, yes, I'm opposed to Three Waters, but there's no case for change. Yes, there is a case for change, but there are far better models than that which is being proposed with Three Waters.
And so if you're elected mayor, would you be proactively involved, get involved in those discussions?
Absolutely. You know, my view is I know my way around Wellington. I actually want to see a good outcome. I'm making absolutely plain that I am standing as an independent. Yes, I have friends of the National Party. Actually, I have got a great deal of numbers on other sides of the Parliament. I want to get an outcome that will work for Nelson. And I think some of that ministerial experience, and it's not just Three Waters, my view is that we have got the winds of change around local government at a fiercer level than what I've seen for 30 years, with the Future of Local Government review and the big shake-up of the planning rules. I actually see it as an opportunity. I'm not one of those that's satisfied with local government as it is. Yes, we've got some specific problems with our own council, but actually there are bigger problems across local government New Zealand. And I see the opportunity, and one of the things that's excited me about the role of mayor is because there is that appetite for change, there's a real opportunity to put my energy and effort in to try and get an outcome that will work for us long term.
You touched on the fact, obviously, you've been a minister in national government for a long time. What do you say to people who think that you're going to bring that thinking directly into the council chamber, given the difference between local government and its immediate impact on people's lives and central government?
Well, firstly, I openly acknowledge that I've got some learning to do around local government. And actually, no matter what job you go into, anybody who thinks they know it all is cruising for a bruising. The strength that I hope to bring to the role is a heap of connections. That is that actually Nelson's got an incredible depth of talent. And that if I'm going to be able to successfully pull that role off, yes, utilise the skills that I've built from 30 years in central government, but splice onto them a knowledge of local government is going to require that I really engage with some of that expertise. The second part of it is around what bits are transferable. And I do think that there needs to be a culture change in Civic House. One of the experience I have as a minister is that your number one job is how do you get the best out of your staff. I'm sorry, it's not the mayor or the councillors that are out there building the pipes or the roads, or are they the ones that are providing the library service or the resource consenting service or developing a future art strategy and its delivery. And the bit that really concerns me is I don't think our current council has a collective culture that they go to each council meeting saying our job today is to get the very best out of our 300 odd council staff. That the scoring sort of political points by either humiliating or criticising the staff has come ahead of that collective duty. And I do think some of that ministerial experience, I've had nearly 15 different portfolios in the cabinet room, actually gives you some idea about, well, how do you do that to get the very best out of that team? Whether you're the Minister of Conservation, you're dependent on a big staff of 1,500 odd people within that department or others, and that is a culture change that I think is going to be required to be led.
And how would you describe then your leadership style to do that? What tools would you bring?
Well, firstly, one of just plain energy. Look, I absolutely love Nelson, want the council to be successful. I am a person that does want to be involved in the detail, but equally understands the boundaries between what is governance and what is management. And I think there has been some greying and blurring of that that's affected the performance of the council. I am an absolute Democrat, and that is that some elections I have won, some I've lost. Nothing makes my skin crawl in seeing someone like Donald Trump try and undermine democracy, like sort of I'm the boss regardless of what the public think. It's a bit like I always hear the retailers say, the customer's always right. Well, in elections, the voters are always right. And I do worry that what's going on as a long-term observer of democracy is that the power of social media is actually driving our community to the extremes. So I'm as opposing of the hard right as I am to the hard left. I'm a moderate. I want to see council making its decisions on the basis of rational and reasoned debate. You know, we've got quite tricky issues like the Maitai development. And again, I don't know all the facts. We've got commissioners that have heard them, but what my style of decision making will be one that wants to have the very best expertise and rational debate to try and get the right long-term outcome for our community.
Yeah. And I mean, the Maitai development is an interesting one because housing obviously is a difficult issue for the region at the moment in terms of affordability and availability.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something that's impacting on our business community and employers to be able to find people to be able to afford to come and live here. What do you think council's role should be in that housing space?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that the floods are going to make the housing problem harder. We've lost at least 100, potentially 200 houses. And the problems we had both in Christchurch and Kaikoura is that in the first 18 months, you've got the families that are displaced that require somewhere to live. You're also going to have a large amount of construction activity that brings extra people and demands on it. So it's a toughie. Now, council is a relatively small player. You know, it has a fraction of the financial resources. So I'm not one that says it's got no role. Here's the bits it needs to do well. Firstly, it needs to be as proactive as possible in processing the building and resource consents quickly, because every month they are delayed is a month longer that someone is without that house. And I don't feel there is that culture. I even talked to an organisation like the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust, providing houses for our most needy, who are just so frustrated that it takes so long to get their projects consented and built. But here's the very specific initiative that I am proposing in this election. The previous council has made a decision to sell the 142 retirement or pensioner cottages to the government. Now, I'm not very excited about that, in the sense that all it did was change the land law for 122 hours. It didn't create any additional housing. But what it has done has created a pot of $12 million in the housing fund. I say that fund should be used by council to drive new community housing. Now, I've worked with the Nelson Housing Trust since their inception in 2004. We've grown it up to a number of 50 houses. This is a big call, Ali, but it's one I think is possible if we work really hard, is to use that $12 million to double that community housing from 50 to 100. It's only 50 extra houses, but actually when you think about that it's taken 15 odd years to get to 50, to say that you're going to double it within 4 years is a big stretch. The reason it's important is that the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust provides houses actually in that affordable range of rentals, which is where the market's under the most pressure. So my answer is there is a role, can't fix it all, needs to work with government, but that is something constructive that it can do to help in the space. Long term, I would like to see the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust expanding and doubling again up to 200 homes.
And we've touched on a few things and we may have already covered it, but what would you think is one of the biggest issue facing Nelson in the next 5 years?
Well, obviously the flood and storm recovery is going to be the top priority. The next thing I'm quite concerned about, of which the council's going to have to be really focused, is I think New Zealand and Nelson are heading into quite challenging financial times. You know, with inflation running north of 7% and interest rates doubling, I think these are going to be the toughest times that Nelson has experienced for more than a decade. Council needs to do two things in response to those challenging times. Number one is try and keep its rates burden as manageable as possible for both households and businesses. And secondly, the council needs to be extra proactive around working with business. What are the things that we knew, whether it's the retailer, whether it's the new IT tech company, making sure that the council is not the blockage, is not the brakes, but is actually supporting the growth of those businesses that are going to have tougher times and are going to need extra support from council.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you're right, we're heading towards difficult times, but at the same time, austerity is not necessarily the best intervention. So where would you stand on investment, particularly in things like the library precinct as an example? Well,
I'm a very strong believer in that, you know, that big high-level economic debate between the sort of austerity argument and the big spender. is that I believe Bill English and John Key called it right in 2009, and that was in these tough financial times, you've just got an extra responsibility to make sure that your spending is wise. So I'm not one of those that says that, cut right back, that runs the risk of the sort of 1930s scenario that brought about a Great Depression. But you do have the duty to be extra careful with your spending. Now, I do not support the library. This is a project that 4 years ago was going to cost 12 million. The budget is now up to 46 million. I think it'll be significantly higher than that, simply because of the degree to which construction price costs have gone up pretty sharply. Having worked in the construction industry for the last year, we've got 20% odd inflation there. So I think the 46 million figure is now conservative. And what's gone on there is you've got mission creep. What started out as a $12 million library, the council's gone out and said, well, what else would you like in it? Everybody's come along with their wish list that's been added onto the project, and it is my view that that project is now unaffordable. My view is that the council should cease spending any additional monies on it. Now, the question about the existing Alma Terminal Library, I don't have access and want to kick the tyres on to what degree it is possible to repair and to maintain that facility. That would be my first preference, but want to get the details. And then secondly, if it is uneconomic for us to continue to maintain that facility, then any alternative needs to be modest, more modest than the $46 million proposal.
And so the library aside, just thinking about civic infrastructure that supports the economic regeneration of the region, what would you support in that space?
Well, one of the things I'm very excited about is, and this is more broadly around the role, if I'm privileged to be mayor, a city like Nelson has to work out what's your mojo, what makes you different, what makes you special. And there's lots about Nelson that's fantastic, whether it be, the entrepreneurial businesses we have, the vibrant arts, the natural environment. But the bit that's truly unique to Nelson is our level of connection with the ocean and marine environment. We are so lucky to have an institute like the Cawthron. Now, their proposal for establishing a major new science centre in Nelson is something that is the sort of forward-looking infrastructure that I think enhances the brand, and if I am privileged to be mayor, would be the sort of additional infrastructure. There's been talk previously of establishing a fisheries and marine centre for Nelson. I don't know whether you remember, Ali, when at Mapua we had a small aquarium.
I do.
And my kids went there and other people's kids there, and they were inspired by that. Now, it needs to be balanced. This is an economy that is hugely connected with the oceans, with our fishing industry. There's the growth of the aquaculture industry with mussels, with oysters, with companies like King Salmon, where my wife works. But it needs to have the environmental side as well, of which we have got at the Cawthron. And I think whether it be in terms of our civic infrastructure, but also how we position Nelson in New Zealand, we are the fishing capital of New Zealand. We need to work harder on making that part of the Nelson brand and part of what drives the scientific and broader economy here.
And just a couple of quicker questions. Amalgamation with Tasman District, do you support it?
I do, on the right detail, devil's in the detail, and we need to take the community with us. So I'm hesitant of my mayoral campaign having amalgamation as a key part of it. It's got to be tied into that conversation about Three Waters, about the future of our Resource Management Act and Planning Review, and that future local government. My view is this is one of those where we need to go about it quite strategically and carefully, or we'll end up like we did a decade ago when the opportunity presented itself. And in my view, poor political management resulted in unnecessarily alienating people and making it more difficult to occur. So make haste slowly would be my strategy around that question.
And public transport, for a lot of our employers, people being able to travel into the city to work is becoming increasingly difficult. And it's always a contentious issue. But would you support more investment in public transport?
Well, firstly, we need to look at the big picture of transport. The Nelson City area contributes $50 million a year to the National Land Transport Fund through both road user charges and petrol tax. That's a heap of loot. That's half the rates bill. And I do worry sometimes that we get so carried away about scrutinising the last $10,000 of the rates bill without looking at this big pot of funds. I am not satisfied that Nelson is getting its fair share of that $50 million a year that goes into the National Transport Fund. And what we need to do is, whether it be public transport or whether it be roading and cycling, is I'm one very much of a balanced approach to transport. We actually need investment in all of those. So yes to public transport, equally yes to expansion of cycleways, but we also need to accept that for a significant number of journeys that the private motor vehicle is going to be the primary means of transport, and we need to invest in our roading infrastructure to accommodate that as well.
And the wider economic development side of things, what do you think council's role should be in economic development?
Well, firstly, the council needs to do its bits well. The only organisation that can provide the infrastructure that Nelson needs is the council. So it needs to be totally on top of that game. And it's got a monopoly over things like the consenting. It needs to do those bits exceptionally well before it starts expanding into the other areas. And then there are other areas where you need to be pragmatic of things that only the council can do. So there's a really crucial role for council around promotion of the region as a good place to invest, a good place to live, a good place to start a new business, a good place to visit. And if the council doesn't do that, the reality is that no one else is there. So it has a role there. It has a role around events. You are not going to attract those events that give you the opportunity to brand Nelson and to attract that investment without support from council. And that's a mix of cultural, of sporting, but also other things that you can bring to the region. Now, I'm a cautious person of the council doing things of which it's not its core business. So if you said to me, and there is an absolutely legitimate argument, that we want to have more intensive housing in our Nelson City area, I say absolutely. But its job is not to be an investor. I don't want it buying up land. I don't want it investing ratepayers' money, because it is my view that the private property developer will do that far more efficiently, effectively than council or government. What its job is to do is to make sure the rules are some that we can get the development of housing in our city. So yes, it is I am a conservative. That means that I view council should stick to its knitting. It needs to be cautious of getting involved where business should be. It should be a partner, it should be a facilitator, but it shouldn't be directly competing with business where the private sector is quite capable of doing the job.
Thank you. And finally, in a nutshell, why should people vote for you? If you could sum it up, what should make people put number one next to your name?
Well, look, I love Nelson. I worry that our council has lost its way, and I'm offering my governance experience to provide positive new direction. The job has got harder with those August devastating floods and landslides. I do think the experience I've had in government, working on the Christchurch earthquakes, the Kaikoura earthquakes, the Edgecombe floods, as well as having a PhD in landslides and engineering expertise, will help me provide the leadership that's going to be needed to get through that tough work. My other key priority is about making our council more business friendly. The consenting is too slow. Some of the rules are hopelessly bureaucratic. Now, we need a council that's got a can-do culture that will actually help our businesses grow. My big picture vision for Nelson is I want us to be vibrant, I want us to be affordable, I want Nelson to be a great place to live, to work, to start a business, to raise a family and to retire. I actually think it's a hugely challenging job, but I'm prepared to give it my everything to make it work for Nelson, and that is the basis of which I'm seeking people's support and vote.